summer lecture series, and for those of you who haven't spotted the calendar of summer events, there are some at the back of the room. On next Tuesday, June 20th, Dr. Paul Hollenbach of the Department of Philosophy will speak on the role of the Bible in the contemporary Jesus movement at 3 o'clock in the gallery. And on Wednesday, the 21st, the Iowa Dance Ensemble will give a demonstration concert illustrating the many moods of modern dance at 8 p.m. in Great Hall. This afternoon, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Theodore Lids. He's professor of psychiatry at Yale University, and it's a pleasure in several ways. First one, rarely gets to introduce people he's known before, and this is the first time I've been privileged to introduce a relative of mine. He is, as I said, professor of psychiatry at Yale. He is a career investigator of the National Institute of Mental Health. He has his bachelor's and medical degrees from Columbia University and an honorary master's degree from Yale. He spent a year in residence at the Center for Advanced Studies at Palo Alto, and is author of about a full gross of articles, plus 3 books: The Family and Human Adaptation, Schizophrenia and the Family, and a book called The Person, which has been translated into 3 languages. And he has promised a forthcoming book on Hamlet. His interest in literature has led him, among other things, to deliver a major paper on Strindberg in Stockholm. And I won't go on any further with his list of credits. I would say that although Dr. Lids is, I'm sure, not himself a controversial speaker, and therefore the Board of Regents' rule on controversial speakers need not be invoked at this time, that the subject of Shakespeare has always managed to be controversial enough so that Dr. Lids has indicated he'd be glad to at least try to answer questions when he's finished.
Thank you, Dick. I'm delighted to be here. This is not far from my first visit to Ames, though the first time I've been speaking here. And I'm absolutely amazed at the loyalty to Hamlet and Shakespeare that people would leave the beautiful outdoors today and come to hear a talk on Hamlet. If I'm not speaking loudly enough, would you just raise your hands or yell from the back of the audience? Is Hamlet a play about madness? It is a play concerned with many fundamentals of existence, about how primal sin corrupts, corruption disillusions, disillusion breeds preoccupation with death, and how preoccupation with death destroys eros. It is a play about vengeance and how avengers lose their souls and corrupt in turn. It is a play about many things that cannot be conveyed in explicit statement, but which the play transmits to our unconscious apprehension by its metaphor and symbolism. Yet, Hamlet is a play about insanity. Madness is the means Shakespeare used to convey the disillusion and despair that pervades the hero and heroine and leads them to rash and self-destructive acts and to express the dissolution of their world. Madness, moreover, is essential to the structure of the play as well as to its themes. Now, of course, you can say that in interpreting Hamlet, everyone rides his own hobby horse, and it's natural for a psychiatrist to make insanity the central issue. Yes, arguments rage as to whether Hamlet is mad or feigning. It is a matter that Shakespeare has balanced carefully and purposefully has left ambiguous. But Ophelia has been the very paradigm of insanity. For these 350 years, people have been adjudged to be as mad as Ophelia. And the play has a special poignancy just because in it we witness how a young maid's wits can be as mortal as an old man's life. And I shall be drawing attention to the neglected topic of Ophelia's madness to show how it not only clarifies the nature of Hamlet's oppression and torment for us, but also the structure of the play, and in the process deepens our awareness of the scope of Shakespeare's genius. My thesis will seem less strange if one pauses and recalls that insanity is a recurrent theme in Shakespeare's plays, in his comedies as well as his tragedies, and that he expressed some excellent ideas about therapy in the Comedy of Errors, and that insanity is crucial to virtually all of his great tragedies, to Macbeth, Lear, Othello, and Timon of Athens, as well as to Hamlet. Considering insanity as central in Hamlet is further warranted because Shakespeare was here dealing with the theme of the mad hero. Hamlet, as we know, derives from the Amleth saga that Shakespeare knew well, which concerned a hero who feigned imbecility and insanity to protect himself from his stepfather uncle, who had openly murdered his father and married with his mother. It is also related to the Roman story of Lucius Junius Brutus, who also feigned imbecility to keep from being slain by his uncle Tarquinius Superbus, a story that we know Shakespeare knew very well as it forms the basis of his early poem, The Rape of Lucrece. Further, it is clear that Shakespeare not only had Orestes in mind, who became mad after committing matricide, but also the Emperor Nero, the incestuous matricide who also became insane. When we turn to the play itself, we not only find that Ophelia's insanity is carefully counterpoised against Hamlet's, and as I shall develop later, the structure of the play depends upon this apposition, but that all of the major protagonists in the play are seeking the cause of Hamlet's madness. Various causes are offered. Each has pertinence, and each is in part confirmed by Hamlet, but also negated by him. The mystery is carefully shrouded in ambiguity as if Shakespeare meant to puzzle, and also as if he were well aware of the overdetermination of mental disorders. Let us look at the protagonist's theories. Of course, Hamlet, Horatio, and the audience know what is wrong with Hamlet. They know that Hamlet has put on an antic disposition beneath which he can hide while finding a way to gain vengeance against his uncle Claudius. But has he deceived Horatio? Has he deceived himself? He admits that he is melancholic to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and at the end of the play, in his penultimate speech that must be taken seriously, he excuses himself to Laertes for his behavior at Ophelia's burial, saying, "What I have done, I here proclaim was madness." Was it Hamlet wronged Laertes? Never Hamlet. If Hamlet from himself be taken away, and when he's not himself does wrong Laertes, then Hamlet does it not. Who does it then? His madness. If it be so, Hamlet is of the faction that is wronged. His madness is poor Hamlet's enemy. And when we turn to the other major characters, we find that in seeking after the origins of Hamlet's madness, each has a theory that reflects his own guilt. The king Claudius says, "What should it be more than his father's death? I cannot dream of," expressing his guilt over murdering Hamlet's father and displacing Hamlet in the election to the throne. His mother Gertrude says, "I doubt it is no other than but the main, his father's death and our o'er-hasty marriage." reflecting her guilt over her inability to contain her sensuality through a decent period of mourning. Polonius attributes it to Hamlet's rejection by Ophelia, for he had forbidden his daughter to give words or talk with the Lord Hamlet lest she be seduced and tender Polonius a fool, but which he later recognizes was also motivated by his jealousy. I fear he did but trifle, but beshrew my jealousy. In a sense, all are correct. Shakespeare even reinforces these theories by having Hamlet at one time or another say how disturbed he is by his father's death, by his mother's hasty marriage, by being deprived of the crown, and eventually, after Ophelia's death, by proclaiming to all how great his love for her had been. They are all in agreement with Polonius, who says, "Mad let us grant him, then, and now remains that we find out the cause of this effect, or rather say, the cause of this defect, for this effect defective comes by cause." They are, in psychiatric terminology, so long ago dynamically oriented, for they believe that through finding the cause, they may be able to find a remedy. However, they all assume that Hamlet knows what is causing his distraction, unappreciative that if Hamlet knew, he might no longer be so afflicted. It is as if a psychiatrist asked the psychotic patient what was causing his insanity and expected a direct answer. Hamlet more properly tells Rosencrantz and Guildenstern that I have of late lost all my mirth, but wherefore I know not. His basic problems remain unconscious. If we wish to learn the cause of his indisposition, we cannot ask Hamlet directly, but must seek it indirectly in the play, for Shakespeare knew. Let us then, as so many before us, start our search after the cause. What is Hamlet's condition at the beginning of the play? We learn from the king and queen that Hamlet is in deep mourning, and they are disturbed that 2 months after his father's death he has still not cast his knighted color off. Indeed, our introduction to Hamlet is rather strange for an introduction to the greatest heroic figure of the Western stage. They are admonishing our hero for his unmanly condolement, indicative of a heart unfortified, a mind impatient and understanding, simple and unschooled. Hamlet takes offense at his mother in asking why the death of his father seems so particular with thee, and bitterly replies, I know not seems, I have that within which passes show. Freud has clarified for us the state of mourning, with its loss of the love object and the self-punishment for the negative aspects of one's ambivalent feelings towards the loved one. The intensity of such mourning as Hamlet's must then indicate the intensity of Hamlet's earlier Oedipal death wishes towards his father. Hamlet, however, as soon as he is alone, clearly tells us that he is not simply mourning for his father, and we realize that his mourning has turned into melancholia, and the reason for it in as clear a statement of the essence of depression as can be found in the entire psychiatric literature. He starts his famous first soliloquy, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting had not fixed his cannon 'gainst self-slaughter." And listen to what he says about his situation. That it should come to this, but 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2, so excellent a king, so loving to my mother, must I remember? And yet, within a month, let me not think on it, frailty thy name is woman, a little month, or ere those shoes were old with which she followed my poor father's body like Niobe, all tears, why she, married with my uncle, O most wicked speed to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets, it is not nor cannot come to good, but break my heart, for I must hold my tongue. We hear then that it is not primarily the loss of his father that troubles Hamlet, but the loss of his mother who had been the most important object of his love. The person who doted on her only son has now turned faithless both to his father and to Hamlet, whose identification with his father has been heightened by his internalization of his recently dead father. We must consider that a son, at the closure of his Oedipal period, can accept his father's priority with his mother, but he believes that he comes next in her affection. Now Hamlet has just returned from his studies at Wittenberg to become his mother's main support, probably expecting to assume the throne. But he finds that he has deceived himself, for his mother hastened to marry his uncle. But he cannot vent his hostility to his mother directly, but he can punish her with his misery and perhaps even by his suicide. When Horatio appears on the scene and tells Hamlet he had come to attend his father's funeral, Hamlet could only bitterly reply, "Do not mock me. I think it was to see my mother's wedding. Would I had met my dearest foe in heaven, or ere I'd seen this day, Horatio." This, then, is our Lord Hamlet at the start of the play, depressed and embittered. But before the day is over, two events occur that will greatly exacerbate his precarious state. In the very next scene, Laertes chides Ophelia for responding to Hamlet's wooing, warning her that Hamlet but seeks to seduce her. At the time, we assume that this is simply a device to inform us that Hamlet and Ophelia are in love. But then Polonius enters, picks up the drift of what Laertes is saying, and forbids his daughter to slander any moment leisure as to give words or talk with the Lord Hamlet, lest he be dishonored with a bastard grandchild. He too seems to share a rather unpleasant opinion of our hero. Before long, Hamlet will find himself deprived of his only remaining important love, as the obedient Ophelia turns from him, and he becomes further embittered towards women and their infidelities. Second, and far more important, that night his father returns from purgatory to inform Hamlet that Claudius had murdered him. He is only telling Hamlet what Hamlet had already more or less consciously felt. "Oh, my uncle, oh, my prophetic soul," Hamlet exclaims. But then the ghost goes on to inform his son that Claudius had won to his shameful lust the will of my most seeming virtuous queen. Now Hamlet's world falls apart. His uncle had not only robbed Hamlet of a father, the crown, and his mother, but far more unbearable to Hamlet is that his mother, who to him had been the epitome of virtue, had committed adultery and perhaps had joined his uncle in committing the murder. These are matters that cannot, as might the marriage of his mother, dissipate with the passage of time and by the replacement of his mother in his life by Ophelia. The ghost exacts a pledge of vengeance against Claudius, but in exacting the pledge he sets a critical limitation, saying, "But howsomever thou pursuest this act, taint not thy mind, nor let thy soul contrive against thy mother aught." When the ghost leaves, Hamlet vows that all else will be wiped from the tables of his memory, and the ghost's commandment alone shall live within his brain. But it is not Claudius whom he curses, but, "O most pernicious woman, O villain, smiling, damned villain." Because his father expressly orders him to spare his mother, Hamlet is to be spared the fate of Orestes, who was driven into insanity after committing matricide. Indeed, Shakespeare may well have picked up the words that Euripides had Orestes utter during a moment of respite from the pursuit of the Furies, when he says to his sister, "Had these eyes seen my father, had I asked them if in duty I ought slay my mother, I think he would have prayed me not to plunge my murdering sword in her who gave me birth. But since he could not revisit heaven's sweet light, I must suffer for these miseries." This is, after all, precisely how Shakespeare starts his play, with the father revisiting the world to order his son to spare his mother. And in the play, we follow the consequences not of matricide, but of a man disillusioned and embittered to the point of matricide, but kept by his father's image, or what we would term his superego, from performing the matricidal act. At times he feels impelled to kill her and be rid of her. At other times to end his own life. But more pervasively, he is more concerned with saving his mother's soul and somehow making it possible for him to again have a mother he can respect and love. Now Hamlet will put on the antic disposition. Why he does so poses something of a problem. It is an essential part of the Amleth saga, where the hero's mental incompetence serves as a shield, but in the play it offers him no advantage and indeed sets Claudius on edge and leads to Hamlet's exile. Now, as you will recall, 2 months elapsed between the end of the first act and the beginning of the second, but Claudius is still alive, and all evidence indicates that Hamlet's condition has worsened greatly during the interlude. We may or may not note it on the stage, depending on how the role is portrayed, but others tell us of the change that has come over him. In the very first scene, Ophelia reports to Polonius how she had been so affrighted by Hamlet appearing in her room, his stockings fouled, pale as his shirt, his knees knocking each other, and with a look so piteous and purport as if he had been loosed out of hell, to speak of horrors, and goes on to tell of his very strange behavior, which leads Polonius to believe this is the very ecstasy of love. Polonius now hopes that a reconciliation and the marriage of his daughter to Hamlet may yet save Hamlet from becoming mad. Claudius, having summoned Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to court, tells them of Hamlet's transformation, which is such that not the exterior nor inner man resembles that it was. And Hamlet, in talking to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, despite his initial somewhat salacious banter with them, admits that he is but mad north-northwest. When the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw. For 2 months, Hamlet has been depressed, cursing at himself for his inactivity and wondering if he is but a coward. Why has he so delayed? As we know, Hamlet's procrastination is a problem that has always perplexed. Ernest Jones, following Freud's footnote in the interpretation of dreams, explained that Hamlet was unable to carry out the command to kill Claudius because of his identification with Claudius, who had only performed a deed that Hamlet himself had wished to perform as an Oedipal child, namely to kill his father and marry his mother. It's a perfectly good theory and indicates a factor that may well have deterred Hamlet. But as I believe will become apparent, the determination to kill Claudius has become a secondary matter to Hamlet's preoccupation with his mother. As Dover Wilson, G. Wilson Knight, Lucas, and other non-psychiatric commentators have noted, it is Gertrude's infidelity that rages within Hamlet. He must attempt to make her undo what she has done. If Claudius were dead, she would not renounce or could not renounce her attachment to him or her sexual life with him, and thus become restituted in Hamlet's eyes. Then, after 2 months of inactivity, the traveling players appear on the scene, and Hamlet bids the chief player speak a piece from a play about the destruction of Troy and the death of King Priam. It is as if, while listening to the first player and watching him agonize about Hecuba, that Hamlet undergoes a change. He tells himself, "For Hecuba, what's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba that he should weep for her? What would he do had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? He would drown the stage with tears, make mad the guilty, and appall the free, confound the ignorant. Even, I may interpolate, as the play Hamlet has been doing for several centuries. It is at this juncture that Hamlet's mood turns from self-pity and inactive misery to action, and indeed to rash and impetuous activity that has both a manic and paranoid quality to it at times. Even as he listens to the first play, he gets the idea that the play is the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king, and plans the play within the play. But he's still uncertain whether it's worth it. He enters upon the soliloquy to be or not to be, with its weighing of suicide and life and of action and resignation. It is the start of the scene in which Ophelia is to confront Hamlet, through which Polonius hopes to demonstrate that Hamlet is mad for the love of Ophelia. Despite Hamlet's continuing love for her, as indicated by his words on seeing her approach, the fair Ophelia, nymph, in thy orisons may be all my sins remembered. He is soon carried away into a tirade against her, against all women, against all mankind, cursing her. I'll give thee this plague for thy dowry. Be thou as chaste as ice, as pure as snow, thou shalt not escape calumny. Get thee to a nunnery. And ends by saying, I say we will have no more marriage. Those that are married already, all but one shall live. The rest shall keep as they are. Ophelia is overwhelmed by his invective and his rejection of her, and takes it as a symptom of his madness, and bemoans the loss of his reason. The king and Polonius, listening behind the curtain, however, find Hamlet's ranting neither mad nor indicative of his love for Ophelia. The king, hearing that all marriages save one shall live, is frightened and determines that Hamlet shall be sent forthwith to England. Polonius admitted that Hamlet did not seem to show love for Ophelia, but shrewdly continues to believe the origin and commencement of his grief sprung from neglected love. But it is not Ophelia's, but Gertrude's love he has lost, or been forced to renounce because of her faithlessness. Hamlet was surely berating Ophelia because of his disillusionment in his mother, which had led to disillusion in all women and to a distrust of love itself, a situation aggravated by Ophelia's obedient withdrawal from him. At the start of the play, within the play, Hamlet's rash reply to the king's greeting, how fares our cousin Hamlet? Excellent of faith, of the Chameleon's dish I eat the air, promise crammed. You cannot feed capons so, which indicates his feeling of having been castrated by Claudius, who keeps him heir to the throne and who stole his father's wife. In the play, within the play, we can discern what preoccupies Hamlet. For as Hamlet tells us, the players cannot keep counsel, they'll tell all. Even though Hamlet's primary intention is to so upset Claudius by reenacting his father's murder that Claudius will give himself away, he seems just as interested in using the play to catch the conscience of the queen, to arouse her sense of guilt and to make her suffer. When in the play the sick king tells the player queen that she will soon find another husband, the player queen says, such love must needs be treason in my breast, and second husband, let me be accursed. None wed the second, but who killed the first, which indicates Hamlet's feelings that even if Gertrude has not participated in the murder, her infidelity makes her equivalent to a murderess. And again, a second time I kill my husband dead when second husband kisses me in bed. And once more, but here and hence pursue me lasting strife, if, once a widow, ever I be a wife. Which leads Gertrude to remark, the lady doth protest too much. To which Hamlet responds, oh, but she'll keep her word. Upon seeing the murder of Hamlet's father reenacted, the king rises to the mousetrap and, frightened with false fire, halts the play and rushes from the room. After the play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern beg Hamlet to confide in them and give up his rash behavior, which leads to the episode that can continue to warn all of us against making simplified interpretations of Hamlet's behavior. You will recall that Hamlet asked Guildenstern to play a recorder, but Guildenstern demurs, insisting that he does not know how, and Hamlet tells him it's as easy as lying. You would play upon me. You would pluck out the heart of my mistress, blood. Do you think I am easier to be played upon than a pipe? He is summoned by the queen and goes off to see her, still in a state of high excitement, saying, "Now could I drink hot blood and do such bitter business as the day would quake to look on." He is not talking of murdering Claudius, for he continues, "Soft, now to my mother, O heart, lose not thy nature, let not ever the soul of Nero enter this firm bosom. Let me be cruel, not unnatural. I will speak daggers to her, but use none." It is at this critical juncture that Hamlet alludes to Nero the matricide, who had an incestuous passion for his mother, dual conflicting impulsions that frequently beset young schizophrenic men. The reference can't be considered casual, for we realize that Nero must have been very much in Shakespeare's mind, for he changed the name of Hamlet's stepfather from Feng in the saga to Claudius, for Emperor Claudius was Nero's stepfather. En route to his mother's chamber, Hamlet passes Claudius at prayer and fails to kill him, a moment that is often taken as the crisis of the play, for his failure to kill Claudius now that he is convinced of his guilt seems inexplicable and leads to tragedy. It seems evident that Shakespeare not only uses the scene to show that Hamlet was not kept from gaining vengeance by lack of opportunity, but also to emphasize how the pursuit of vengeance can make a man lose his soul. The scene might well be considered the moral climax of the play, even though it is not its dramatic climax. When Hamlet spares Claudius, he does not save his own soul, but loses it. In his hatred of his uncle, in the bitterness of his soul, he becomes devoid of humanity. He will not kill Claudius at prayer lest he achieve salvation, but will wait until he is drunk or in his rage or again in the incestuous pleasure of his bed, that his soul may be damned and black as hell. But meanwhile, Claudius is praying almost achieves repentance and salvation. He admits his guilt, and his very inability to pray contains the seeds of redemption, for he realizes, what form of prayer can serve my turn? Forgive me my foul murder? That cannot be, since I am still possessed of those effects for which I did the murder, my crown, my own ambitions, and my queen. May one be pardoned and still retain the offense? This is not the prayer of a villain. He has sinned, broken a primary taboo, but he is human and he can love. But salvation is an illusion, for he is a lime soul that's struggling to be free, art more engaged, and soon the net of his evil doing will envelop him and will soon corrupt Laertes as well. Hamlet, in the grip of his passion for vengeance, overwhelmed by his jealousy, has now become incapable of love and has become, in G. Wilson Knight's terms, an embassy of death. It is in this mood that Hamlet enters his mother's room, almost out of control and frightening her severely, lest he murder her. Responding to his mother's question, "Have you forgot me?" with, "No, you are the queen, your husband's brother's wife, and, would it were not so, my mother." He insists that she not budge until she set up a glass where she may see the inmost parts of herself. He needs to get his mother to repent and change and become his mother again, and all else seems secondary. It is in the intensity with which he does it, Gertrude becomes fearful and cries for help. Polonius, hidden behind the arras, echoes a cry, and in an instant Hamlet whips out his rapier and kills unseen the father of his beloved. When Gertrude exclaims, "Oh, what a rash and bloody deed," Hamlet can only reply, "Almost as bad, dear mother, as kill a king and marry with his brother." Hamlet is so preoccupied with what he is doing that he lets Polonius lie there, and we too leave Polonius forgotten on the floor, scarce noting that with this act The play reaches its crisis, for a happy outcome will no longer be possible. Until this moment, a person seeing the play for the first time, and there once was a time when people saw the play for the first time, will be expecting or hoping that Hamlet and Ophelia will be reconciled at the play's end. But now the play, just as after Romeo slays Juliet's kinsman Tybalt, must move inevitably to a tragic outcome. In the meantime, the play goes on with Hamlet wringing his mother's heart, but he does not inform her that Claudius murdered his father, or try to gain her to his side against Claudius as occurs in the saga. He but rails against her infidelity. In reply to the queen's question, "What have I done?" he scolds, "Such an act that calls virtue hypocrite, takes off the rose from the fair forehead of innocent love and sets a blister there, makes marriage vows as false as Dice's oaths," and continues, "Nay, but to live in the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying and making love over the nasty sty," and works himself into a frenzy until the ghost appears to calm him and tell Hamlet to step between his mother and her fighting soul. Here, in contrast to the ghost's first appearance, only Hamlet sees his father. Gertrude sees Hamlet staring into empty space, and we are clearly left with the impression that Hamlet is hallucinating, needing his father as a superego figure to bolster his failing self-control lest he slay his mother. What is it Hamlet wants? In reply to her admonition that the ghost was the very coinage of your brain, now Hamlet makes his plea. "Mother, for love of grace, lay not that flattering unction to your soul that not your trespass but my madness speaks. Confess yourself to heaven. Repent what's past. Avoid what is to come. And do not spread the compost on the weeds to make them ranker." In response to her, "O Hamlet, thou hast cleft my heart in twain," he tells her, "Go not to my uncle's bed. Assume a virtue if you have it not." And again, "By no means let the goat king tempt you again to bed, pinch wanton on your cheek, or claw you his mouth, and let him, for a pair of reechy kisses, or paddling in your neck with his damned fingers, make you to ravel all this matter out, that I essentially am not in madness, but mad in craft." But Hamlet has said or done nothing to show his mother that he is in control of himself. He has almost ignored the fact that he has killed Polonius. He has not confided that Claudius murdered his father. He simply rants against her sexuality. There is probably no other place in literature where a son reprimands a mother so fully and explicitly for her sexual relations with her husband. One aspect of the play's great appeal may come from just this overt and dramatic cry for a mother to renounce her sexual life that virtually all sons have had to repress. Act 2, then, ends with Hamlet telling the audience that he is going to kill Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, making this decision even before he later learns of Claudius's plot against him. It is as if he is now quite out of control, flushed with success. In manic fashion, he has demolished Ophelia, killed Polonius, and chastised his mother, and in so doing, he has, in a sense, changed places with her, acting as if he were the parent and she the child, saying to her, pleading with her, "And when you are desirous of being blessed, I'll blessing beg of you." It is at this juncture that the balance of the play swings over on the fulcrum of the slaying of Polonius. Hamlet, having said what he must to his mother, is now free to act and ready to take his vengeance on Claudius. But his position has changed completely. He will now be pursued more than he will pursue. He is no longer the virtuous, wronged hero, for he has become the wrongdoer, and from the point of view of Ophelia and Laertes, he has become the villain, and their father's blood demands Hamlet Italian vengeance. Who is the hero? As Ophelia in her madness will soon say, "Lord, we know what we are, but know not what we may be." The transition is marked by the gruesome, dysphoric dance macabre at the start of the fourth act, which gains force around Ophelia's insanity. Hamlet drags Polonius's body around the castle, plays games, and makes grotesque witticisms, punning on the diet of worms, and thus manically and taunts and insults the king. The counter-theme that starts with Polonius's death will bring the play's resolution through the opposition of the two themes. Shakespeare had carefully laid the foundations for this counter-theme in the third scene of the first act when Polonius ordered Ophelia to reject Hamlet. Now, unless we realize how carefully the themes are intertwined and how Ophelia's madness is the feminine mirror image of Hamlet's indisposition, we can neither properly appreciate Shakespeare's greatness nor why the play has such timeless and universal appeal. The cause of Ophelia's madness seems apparent to all. It springs all from her father's death. When we consider, however, it is rather that she cannot absorb her father's murder by Hamlet, the person she loves, and upon whose love she has placed all of her hopes. Now she can not only never marry him, but has an obligation to hate the man she would love, and indeed she must feel hatred for him. She is now in very much the same situation as Hamlet has been. Hamlet was suddenly forced to turn against his beloved mother for murdering, at least symbolically, his father. They are both faced with the sudden and irretrievable loss of an object of their love, the primary object of their love, because of the unforgivable behavior of the person most loved by them and who thereby is also lost to them. Herein lies the essence of the tragedy that cannot be assimilated and leads to irrationality and death. Ophelia's madness is clear-cut. As a passive, obedient, and very feminine person, she does not take arms against the sea of troubles. She is simply poor Ophelia, divided from herself in her fair judgment, without the which we are pictures or mere beasts. She cannot say what is wrong with her, but in her passivity she incenses Laertes to vengeance. Laertes, seeing his pathetic mad sister, says, "Hadst thou thy wits and didst persuade revenge, it would not move thus. Yet I would hazard, where Ophelia asked, she would, even as Hamlet's father had, beg Laertes to spare Hamlet's life. But soon, garlanded with the flowers symbolic of herself as the rose of May, she falls weeping in the brook and drowns. And now Hamlet, having escaped the king's plot and sent his former friends Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to their deaths for no wrongdoing of theirs, paranoidally suspecting them of being the king's spies and emissaries, conducting him to his execution, has now, by his murder of Polonius and Ophelia's ensuing insanity, united Laertes with Claudius, and lost all potential allies other than Horatio. And now, in the endless cycle of vengeance, Laertes also turns to villainy that will lead him to his death. But it enables Shakespeare to contrast Hamlet's procrastinations with Laertes' actions. We learn that it has not been the king's guards or the fear of the populace that has kept Hamlet from gaining vengeance, as various critics have argued. Laertes, even without any claim to the crown, mobilizes the multitude who shout, "Laertes shall be king," and brushes past the king's guard to corner Claudius and threaten to slay him. When Laertes bursts in upon the king, he responds to Gertrude's plea calmly, "Good Laertes," by saying, "That drop of blood that's calm proclaims me bastard, cries cuckold to my father, brands the harlot even here between the chaste, unsmirched brows of my true mother." Here Laertes is saying precisely what Hamlet cannot say nor feel, for Claudius has not only killed his father but whored his mother. He has been unable to act because he feels that the guilt is as much his mother's as his uncle's. Her behavior, as we have heard, takes off the rose from the fair forehead of an innocent love and sets a blister there. That is, the blister caused by the brand of the harlot. His father is cuckolded and his world is empty and meaningless. He would as lief die as continue in the barren world, for nothing can be created for him, unless it were Ophelia's love, and indirectly he has now killed her too. Of course, Hamlet had killed Polonius more or less accidentally, and not as Claudius had killed his father. Still symbolically, at least, he murdered Polonius. It will be noted that Hamlet is hostile to Polonius throughout the play. He never says a decent word to him and mocks and baits him, which is not very proper behavior for a sensitive hero, particularly to the man who had been his father's prime minister for many years, as well as being the father of his beloved. He certainly did not follow his own admonition to Polonius concerning the players. Use every man after his desert, and who shall escape whipping? Use them after your own honor and dignity. For part of the play, he may well have realized that Polonius had kept Ophelia from him. Even without such realization, he was acting hostilely towards a father figure who, like his own father and his stepfather, had stood between him and his love. His behavior, and symbolically the mother, concerns the jealousy that exists between a suitor and a potential father-in-law. This mutual jealousy moves on to the rivalry with Ophelia's brother Laertes, which comes to a head in the graveyard scene where Hamlet and Laertes are at one another's throats in Ophelia's grave. Hamlet, who has scorned Ophelia in the confrontation scene and had degraded her with his salacious remarks during the play, now vies with Laertes, who asks to be buried with his sister and lets the audience and all of the actors know of his undying love for her. I will fight with him upon this theme. I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not, with all their quantity of love, make up my son. In the end, he of the riddles expresses the ultimate riddle or paradox. If it be not now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. And he goes on to give his answer, perhaps the only answer: the readiness is all. Death is as good an answer as any after what has happened to his world in the few months since he was summoned home from his study of philosophy at Wittenberg. He had not wasted his time there, for in his philosophic, the readiness is all, he has found the answer and become heroic in moving beyond the fear of death or the fear of life. What remains? A modern drama might well drop the final curtain as Hamlet completes this speech and Osric enters carrying the foils. But Shakespeare's play continues with Hamlet not only sick to death over his mother's behavior, but sick over his own action that has killed Polonius and Ophelia. Before the duel, he apologizes to Laertes. He has done him wrong, but as I have already noted, disclaims responsibility for it. It was Hamlet's enemy, his madness, and not Hamlet that wronged Laertes. He wins the duel as a hero should, but probably because Laertes finds the duel almost against my conscience, because of the unbaited and poisoned foil he is using. And the play ends as it must, with Gertrude, Claudius, Laertes, and Hamlet all dead, joining Polonius and Ophelia in a Götterdämmerung caused by treachery. When Gertrude is dead and Hamlet no longer needs a father figure to stand between himself and his incestuous desires, he can finally kill Claudius, which he does by forcing the king's own poison down his throat while calling him an incestuous, murderous, damned Dane. The play ends as it begins on a military note when Fortinbras has four captains bear Hamlet like a soldier to the stage, for he was likely, had he been put on, to have proved most royally. Had he been put on. Like all else in the play, Hamlet's status is left ambiguous. neither properly hero nor villain, but a hero manqué. And the play and the role can be interpreted in many ways, but any careful reading eliminates the traditional romantic hero. In a contemporary version, Hamlet might be an anti-hero in revolt against an older generation, against the establishment, disillusioned and anomic because the older generation has not lived up to its teachings, and virtue itself for vice must pardon beg. All in all, Hamlet remains a potential hero whose idealism becomes lost in this all-too-human world, but torn by jealousy and hatred, he becomes incapable of love and cannot bring fruition to that rose of May, Ophelia, but blights the blossoming spring which she symbolizes. I have sought to show the central importance of the theme of madness to Hamlet. Shakespeare had much to say about insanity and its causes. He antedated Freud in his understanding of mourning and melancholia, and he portrays how Hamlet is torn asunder emotionally and can no longer control his behavior when embittered and disillusioned in his mother because of her betrayal of his father, and he must renounce her as an object of his love. The play then gains poignancy and a still broader appeal by showing how a young maid's wits can be as mortal as an old man's life, how Ophelia is caught in a situation essentially the same as Hamlet's, being forced to renounce Hamlet and feel betrayed by him when he kills her father. The balance of the play pivots around the murder of Polonius and Ophelia's ensuing insanity, opposing the action and implications arising from them to the major theme arising from the murder of Hamlet's father, Gertrude's infidelity, and Hamlet's subsequent indisposition. Although madness is essential to the plot and the character portrayals, Hamlet, of course, is not simply a play about insanity. It is a play that considers with amazing succinctness many basic problems and conflicts of human existence, issues that transcend era, place, and specific culture. As Shakespeare deals with madness as the ultimate in tragedy and a resultant of insurmountable inner conflicts, following the theme of insanity leads us to the array of vital themes encompassed within the play. The play is concerned with the basic Oedipal theme of a boy's love for his mother, but not simply with his desires for her and his envy and fear of his father, but also how a youth's emotional stability rests upon his trust in his mother and even in his belief in her fidelity to the father he envies. The Oedipal situation is so handled in the play that it permits a son to chide his mother with venomous intensity for her sexuality and to beseech her to give it up, even as many boys consciously or unconsciously have ever wished to do. It is a play concerned with a man who turns away from his beloved and feels antagonistic to all women because of his disillusionment with his mother. This theme in turn weaves into another timeless problem, the jealousy of a father for his daughter's love and his latent antagonism to any suitor she loves, leading to rivalry between the girl's two loves, her father and her lover. Ophelia concomitantly is caught between her love and obedience to her father and her desire to be liberated from it and achieve womanly and sexual fulfillment, but is shattered when Hamlet destroys her father. Anything else? Above and beyond such themes, Hamlet, from its opening scenes, presents to us that core existential dilemma brought about by man's ability to choose between life and death. It weighs through the play's actions, as well as through Hamlet's soliloquies, the benefits and burdens of life, and considers the temptation of finding surcease through suicide. It is a dilemma that touches all men who in periods of despondency fear that the temptation may overcome their more usual instinctual desires for life. Further, the play seems to argue quite clearly that the loss of a cardinal love object, particularly through disillusion and rage rather than by death, can swing the pendulum towards the side of death. Finally, it is a play that comments upon the relativity of good and evil, of the heroic and the villainous. The hero of the play, the morally indignant young Hamlet, becomes a villain to Laertes, and insofar as he can be to Ophelia. And from the avenger, he becomes the object of vengeance. It shows how both the prince and Laertes lose their souls in the pursuit of vengeance, and thus, like Aeschylus in his version of the Agamemnon trilogy, Shakespeare pursues the tragic consequences of Italian law, teaching not through moralizing, but through following the consequences of passionate misdeeds performed in the obligation and fury of blood vengeance. Took a little longer than I expected, but if somebody has some questions to ask, I'll try to answer them or say what I think about them anyway. Well, I think that it's a very good question because I think there is a changing emphasis. Freud and many of those who followed him would want to locate this rather cleanly to a sharp period, say between the ages of 2.5 and 5 about. I think today the whole Oedipal situation is seen or is apt to be seen by many analysts rather differently, as that it is obviously essential that every child girls as well as boys, have very intense affectionate attachments to their mothers. And it is also equally important that this attachment be purified, let us say, of sexuality by the time the person becomes adolescent at least. In the boy, this is apt to take place usually by the age of 6 or 7. In the girl, many of us now feel that the situation is quite different, that her attachment to the father, that is the eretized attachment to the father, is not apt to be overcome until the prepubertal period, so that there are quite some differences. This is one reason we think that the girl remains more centered in the home than the boy does. Now, we don't consider it, of course, in a child an unnatural attachment. We think it's a perfectly normal attachment, and that the boy is going to be rivalrous of his father or of brothers, and this is perfectly acceptable. The question is what happens when this does not die out or is not properly resolved or repressed by the time the boy enters adolescence. There are always questions about Hamlet. I can argue with myself for hours. Well, I don't think it's necessary to say whether he's insane or not. That he was seriously troubled to the point of desperation, I think nobody can deny. And that Ophelia was insane is obvious. And that Hamlet is troubled by insanity is also obvious. I mean, he says so, everybody else says so, and this is everybody in the play. You might say that the play looked at one way as a question of the diagnosis of what is causing Hamlet to be insane, whether or not, is something that preoccupies virtually everybody in the play, and preoccupies us too, whether he is or not. Of course, I think there's a difference. In the old days, one used to think of insanity as something caused by something. That is, a germ, Treponema pallidum of syphilis had gotten into the brain, or or some hormone was out of balance and these were abnormal people. Most of us today don't see that there are such sharp distances, but really that there is a time comes when a person's behavior, when a person is no longer capable of directing his own life because he is so overwhelmed by passion of some kind or another, we would deem him more or less insane. So that there isn't, it isn't a question of is he or isn't he, but rather how seriously affected is he. It wouldn't be quite the play we have. I would say it has happened in other plays by lesser playwrights. But I mean, it is up to this point. It's really very similar to what happens in Romeo and Juliet when you come to think of it. You would really expect Romeo and Juliet are going to work this out somehow, despite the antagonisms, the hostilities of the family. But once Tybalt is killed, that's the end. And this, of course, is much more so than the slaying of Tybalt, because it's Ophelia's father who is killed. Hi.
There's one problem in the Shakespeare is always interested me, and that's the matter of whom do we believe, what speaker do we believe. I was thinking of the incident at the graveyard scene where Hamlet said, it is not Hamlet, but his master. And in that situation, Laertes had just finished lying to Hamlet. We know this. Because Laertes is already involved in the plot. And so we move to the what do we believe? And he said, do we have that speech? Or do we view them as taking part in their piece of deception, their tragedy, among other deception, and deception is play. And it sometimes seems to me we set our minds ever short in a situation like so.
Yes, there's nothing in the play. Everything in the play one can say this about. There's almost nothing in the play that cannot be taken one way or the other, and one cannot balance one way against the other. And of course it is this ambiguity that allows this play to be recreated in every generation in accord with the temper of the times. What's his name, the great Polish playwright, for example, points out how he produced Hamlet in the Poland in the 1920s in a very existentialist way with an extremely disillusioned youth. When he first did it, it certainly would have been out of place in this country. Each year it becomes more appropriate to be a version of Hamlet given in this country. It was possible somehow for the whole first part of the 20th century to have John Barrymore considered to be the great Hamlet. And yet I doubt that any current Hamlet scholar could survive seeing John Barrymore do Hamlet in this fashion today. And yet I suppose with turning it a little differently, we could be able to see Hamlet that way. My own feeling about that actual speech is, though, that this is next to the last speech Hamlet makes in the play. It's not at the graveyard scene. It is just as he is about to start the duel. I think it has to be taken seriously. And, whether or not that doesn't mean he is mad, because all he's saying is, he can just as well be saying, I was overwhelmed by my passion, and that is what wronged you.
And